On today's episode of the Old Souls Football Podcast, Neil and I go over one of the biggest blunders in the NFL's history, Drew Brees' free agency in 2006. What happens if Miami passes him on the physical and he signs there? What happens to the Saints? Who else could have had him? And why was he available? All that next. 2006. Taylor Swift debuts her number one song, Tim McGraw. Not confusing at all. It's called Tim McGraw, even though Tim McGraw was a famous country artist. So when people go up to you and ask, have you heard Tim McGraw? Yes, I've heard Tim McGraw.
Yeah, right.
But they're talking about Taylor Swift. And that was 2006. It's been 18 years and we're still talking about her.
Yeah. And she's bigger now than ever.
Yes, she's taken over.
She is. She's going to win the Super Bowl.
Who's a bigger person? Is it her or like in terms of like celebrity? Is it her or like Trump? Who's like more famous?
I heard, man,
That's close.
I'd say it's pretty damn close. Honestly, I might even say like she is because, like there's probably like little girl. Well, I mean, you could say the same thing about there's men in Russia or Kazakhstan or whatever that know who Trump is.
They all listen to Swift.
Yeah, but they all listen to Swift.
Yeah.
Damn, I don't know. That's a good one.
Florida wins their first national championship in college basketball. Back-to-back seasons. They win in 2007 again.
Yeah.
Great team. Joakim Noah, Corey Brewer, Al Horford, who still plays for the Celtics.
Yeah.
He's like 45 years old at this point. LeBron makes his first championship or his first NBA Finals appearance for the Cavaliers in 2006.
It didn't go good at all for him.
In fact, he made it. He was impressive.
Yeah, he was.
No doubt. Talladega Nights hits the theaters, one of Will Ferrell's best movies. We've discussed this before, but probably ranks just behind like Old School. I love Step Brothers as well.
Yeah, Step Brothers definitely up there.
The NHL, they're in the middle of their first season since their lockout, trying to regain popularity. So that's kind of the scene of 2006, where we are, kind of not just in the sports world, but in the world in general. The other big story in sports that we haven't mentioned yet is free agency in the NFL. And one of those teams, or a bunch of teams need quarterback, and either in free agency or in the draft. One of those teams is the Miami Dolphins.
The Miami Dolphins in 2006, to give their story properly, we have to kind of go back a couple years before that. 2004, the end of the Dave Wannstedt era. It ended very poorly. It started out okay. Wannstedt had a couple strong teams, couple playoff teams early on, 2000, 2001, 02, 03. We talked about 02 last week, or that Dolphins team from 02. Good teams, but didn't make the playoffs. And then 04, the bottom just fell out entirely. Ricky Williams left the NFL for his own personal endeavors.
Smoking weed,
smoking doobies. In a way you couldn't blame him. Wannstedt ran him into the ground, like brutally. I mean, all he did was, of course, that's what Dave Wannstedt believed in.
I'll have some stats for you. So in 2003, 392 carries, and in 2002 he had 383.
Oh my God. And that's like nearly 800 touches in 2 years.
Oh, those were just carries. I didn't even count the receptions or anything.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a part of it though. I mean,
he was just getting
absolutely wailed on.
Yeah. Just constantly giving Ricky the ball.
Yeah. You couldn't blame them because they lost their workhorse. Jay Fiedler is not the guy that you are going to rely on to be your franchise savior at quarterback. And it was kind of a fault of Wannstedt. He didn't really ever pursue better quarterbacks. He was fine with a quarterback that didn't turn over the ball and a running game and a defense that could win him games. But as we all know, that can win you games. It's only going to get you to a certain point though. So 04, they go 1-8 to start the season. Wannstedt gets canned. And he ends up going to Pitt, and he's there for a few years. But anyways, Miami, going into 05, goes to the college rank. they went and signed or hired, I should say, Nick Saban to be their new head coach. Saban had been in the NFL in the early 90s. I actually wonder how many young kids today really know Nick Saban was in the NFL at all, and not even
Well,
just the two different stints.
I mean, I feel like if you watch any NFL Network or if you spend enough time on YouTube, you'll see videos about the '94 Browns.
Yeah, I'd say
Like,
so. Um,
but I mean, my favorite coach of those three is of that staff. It's not Saban or Belichick. Who is it?
Jim
You know the.
Schwartz.
Oh no, the most
Oh, Mike
entertainment.
Lombard,
The no, the most entertaining football coach of all time in terms of the brand of football that he plays.
Kirk Ferentz.
Oh yeah, man. If you love special teams
Oh, we love it.
and
We
defense,
are
like
huge Iowa Hawkeye supporters on
yeah,
the Old Souls podcast.
yeah.
Um,
I'm joking because I mean
yes,
Iowa, it's
kind
like
of.
watching paint dry a little bit, but
Yeah, so Saban had been with the Browns in the early 90s, and then he went to Michigan State. He was there for a few years. He did all right there. I mean, considering like there was some big dogs in the Big Ten at the time. Like it's not like it is nowadays where the SEC rules all. I mean,
yep.
Penn State had just won a national championship in 94.
One of
Was
those big dogs was Drew Brees, actually.
he was, ironically. And Penn State won in 94. Ohio State was a win away from a national championship opportunity in 95 and 96 until Big Blue beat them. In
Yeah.
97, Michigan won. The last time they won until about 3 weeks ago. And so, yeah, so it was difficult there, but he held his own. He ended up going to LSU, had success there nearly right away. His second year, they won the SEC title. They won the Sugar Bowl against U of I, Illinois. In his fourth year, they won the BCS national championship. He actually almost flipped to the NFL after that national title when the Bears had the opportunity to hire him, and they ended up going with Lovie Smith. That's also kind of a what if. What would have happened if they did go with Saban? But
Yeah.
anyways,
Y'all probably
Saban,
don't make y'all probably don't make the Super Bowl in '06,
no,
but
certainly not. And
you
honestly,
probably ma-
like
you probably made the Super Bowl in 2008, 2009. Now I could see that.
possibly, but I don't know like how he would have like worked with a guy like Urlacher. I feel like
You would have made him a dominant player.
he would have, but like I personality wise,
Yeah.
I don't know if they would have meshed well because
Who knows?
Urlacher could be difficult. But yeah, nobody knows for sure. So he went back to LSU for the '04 season and then to come back in '05 to the NFL with the Miami Dolphins. It didn't get started off great for them in '05. The first 3 months of the year, they were 3-7. He looked a little bit over his head. He was able to get like the likes of Jason Taylor to be a stand-up edge rusher, which was like a little bit of a career renaissance for Jason Taylor. Not that he needed it. It's what he ended up doing for the rest of his career was standing up and rushing from that position.
I think it
Um,
prolonged his career a little bit
it
because
probably did. It's so he I guess he obviously he knew what he was doing.
yep.
And then in '05 they finished on a 6 game win streak. So they were going into that offseason feeling good. Very similar to, say the likes of Detroit last year. Detroit finished, I think, on like a 6 game. It wasn't six. I think they won like 6 of 7. Green Bay had a great finish to the season this year after a rocky start. There's usually one team every year. It seems like it anyways. Maybe recency bias is kicking in.
No,
But
I remember the '02 Panthers were like that. So
yeah,
they finished 7-9, but I want to say they won like four of their last five of their last six, or something like
yeah.
that. And then they went to the Super Bowl the following year.
On
Momentum
that
is a real thing.
it is. The '83 Bears were like that. I know they won like 5 of their last 6 to finish 8-8 in '83. They ended up winning
Hmm.
the division in '84, obviously the
Yep.
Super Bowl in '85. So every year it seems like there's one team that they finish on a really strong note. They carry that momentum into the offseason. They're the hot pick. Everybody is saying, oh, this could be the team that, they struggled at the beginning of last year, but they look like they could be a playoff team for next year. And they still had to need a quarterback, the Dolphins did. They had Gus
Yep.
Frerotte, who wasn't good. He was serviceable. He wasn't good. we've joked before, most known at that point for headbutting the wall at FedEx Field or Stadium or whatever the hell they called it.
He headbutted the damn wall. Like,
Like, and he
I
got a
mean,
concussion from it too, didn't he?
yeah, I think it knocked him out of the game.
Oh my God.
So it it when that's your number one kind of draw,
You have to get a new quarterback.
but as you just said, the number one takeaway that I want anyone on this that's listening, all five people that are probably listening to this podcast,
And the
I
one guy in
want,
Belgium.
yes, we're international, baby. I'm Mr. Worldwide.
Mr.
But
Worldwide.
Mr. Worldwide. But anyway, the number one takeaway of this podcast is the fact that Nick Saban took a team with Gus Frerotte while he was in the same division with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady
Yeah.
to 9-7. So when people say that Nick Saban sucked in the NFL, Nick
No,
Saban was really good.
it was a
Just like
complicated issue in all honesty.
Nick Saban never failed anywhere. Yeah, Nick
He-
Saban he was good in college, he was good in the pros, he was good anywhere he went. And the reason why he didn't have success with the Dolphins like he did with Alabama, with LSU, Michigan State, he didn't have his quarterback. And that's the number one thing you have to win in the NFL.
And the opportunity was there after the '05 season because the likes of Drew Brees was about to hit free agency.
Yeah. And Drew Brees was like this. I think a lot of people have hindsight bias with Drew Brees because obviously it worked out really well in New Orleans. You know, Hall of Fame career, put up a bunch of numbers. We'll get to that in a second. But I don't think it was as slam dunk of a free agent acquisition as everybody makes it out to be now. Like he
Yeah.
wasn't at, like everybody says, oh, you're signing this perennial all pro player. I'm like, number one, if he were as good as he turned out in New Orleans, the Chargers trade Phillip Rivers. They don't let Breeze go.
Yeah. No,
So
they probably don't
that's
even
the,
fucking draft Phillip Rivers, probably.
yeah. Drew Brees, really great college profile, to be honest with you. The only thing that he doesn't have is size. He's not a super big guy, but he was a 4-year starter at Purdue. His stats were incredible: 81 touchdowns, 41 picks, almost 11,000 passing yards. A bunch of all Big Ten teams. Was like third in the Heisman voting in 2000. Only guys he was behind were Chris Winkie and Josh Heupel. And Josh Heupel, you might recognize that name from
Yeah.
being a Tennessee head coach now. Actually led Oklahoma to the national championship that season. But he finished ahead of people like LaDainian Tomlinson, Michael Vick, and Santana Moss, all really good pros. So Drew Brees, total stud at Purdue, basically took a program that's, what would you say Purdue is, like low tier Big Ten? Like
Yeah.
Michigan, Ohio State are like the upper tier, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Wisconsin, Penn State are like upper mid.
yeah. But even besides just talking about that Purdue team, credit to Joe Tiller too. Joe Tiller brought basketball on grass from Wyoming to
Yeah.
Purdue. I mean, they had a really fun offense.
And Brees was the
Um,
point guard.
and Breeze was the point guard. Everything was 4 or 5 wide, just sling the ball around. It wasn't Big Ten football by any stretch of the
No.
imagination, but that's what was so unique about it. And
If
honestly, the fact that it worked was crazy.
it honestly felt like when I watched the Purdue Michigan game from 99, the Tom Brady versus Drew Brees game.
Yeah,
And Brady only played the first half, really. So honestly, it felt like I was watching a college offense from like 2012, 2013, where
yeah.
they were spreading out. It looked completely foreign to,
hmm
but Breeze had, awesome accuracy. I was just watching like great pocket presence. No moment seemed too big for him, even though they were playing well above their competition. And they ended up
Yeah.
losing the game pretty handily. But he was playing well above his competition. But the fact that he didn't go first round kind of shocks me.
You could see Drew Brees that we know on the
Yeah.
video.
Yeah, he's awesome. And maybe it's the black and gold of Purdue that just kind of
Yeah,
sets in. Maybe that's what I saw. I don't
maybe.
know.
Yeah.
He's the first pick of the second round. So back then there's only 31 teams, so he was technically a second round pick, 32nd overall. He was picked 2 years after the Chargers took Ryan Leaf, number 2 in the 98 draft. And that draft had Peyton Manning in it, so really sucks for the Chargers because you missed out on Peyton Manning and you draft a total disaster. Leaf was just awful from the start. And it started with him skipping his rookie symposium. Like
Oh,
you could tell from that you could tell the immaturity was there from like the very beginning with this guy. Skipped that. And then I think he had a game against Kansas City where he was coming off an injury. He was actually hospitalized with that injury. He had, and just listen to this stat line for a second. It is an amazing stat line. I've never seen really anything like it in my years. I've been watching football nearly 25 years at this point. The Chargers lose this game in Kansas City. Ryan Leaf
okay.
stat line 1 for 15.
Oh boy. That's
Completed one pass for 4 yards,
oh Christ on a cracker.
2 interceptions, two
Yeah.
sacks. And the Chargers end up with minus 17 net passing yards.
His EPA per play was probably like -5 per
Yeah,
play.
like in my little footnotes here, I basically said the only way it would be worse is if you put me back there.
Yeah.
And I have no
It
experience.
wouldn't happen as worse because you wouldn't have gotten to 14 incompletions. You would have been injured
Yeah,
before.
my
Yeah.
ass would have like broken my leg already. I'd be at the hospital. But
Yeah. But you would have completed a pass.
yeah,
You would have been 1 of 10 instead of 1 of 15.
yeah, I'm better at watching football than playing it, man. I'll tell you that. After that game, confronts a reporter. Everybody's seen the clip of him yelling at San Diego Union
Classic.
Tribune. Reporter Jay Posner yells at him, "Knock it off." This is all in his like rookie season. Really great start for this guy. 99, he tears his labrum in training camp. So this guy has like no mental toughness. He's already a bust. Everybody knows it. He wasn't a good teammate. He wasn't good at football. Total disaster. So 2000, Jim Harbaugh becomes the starter.
Hmm.
99, Jim Harbaugh starts.
Future head
2000,
coaches, the
yeah,
Chargers.
yeah. So 99, Jim Harbaugh is the coach. In 2000, Leaf gets one more shot. He goes 1-8, 11 touchdowns, 18 picks. Finish his career 4-14. It's done. One of the worst NFL draft picks of all time. Bobby Beathard's reputation, his Hall of Fame candidacy are probably negatively affected by that pick because he built one of the great teams of all time with the 80s and 90s Redskins.
Hmm.
Completely undone. He even built this Chargers team in the
In
90s,
the
got
mid
him to a Super
90s.
Bowl.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
completely undone, all because of one pick, right? So Drew Brees is not going into a healthy situation because when you have a pick like that, it's like stage 4 cancer. This team is in disarray at this
Yeah.
point. Beathard's gone. Drew Brees comes in. He's picked, like I said, he's second pick or first pick of the second round. Excuse me. Some good players were in that draft. That was the Michael Vick class. I would say there's probably 10, 15 Pro Bowlers, not Pro Bowlers, but like Pro Bowl alternates at some point. You
Yeah.
had guys like LaDainian Tomlinson, Hall of Fame, Richard Seymour, Hall of Fame, and then Santana Moss, Casey Hampton, Deuce McAllister, Reggie Wayne, who should be in the Hall of Fame,
Yeah.
Todd Heap, Kyle Vanden Bosch, Algie Crumpler, Chad Ochocinco, Chris Jenkins, Matt Light, Chris Chambers, Travis Henry, Sean Rogers, Adrian Wilson, Steve Smith Sr., who could make the Hall of Fame, possibly. We'll see.
Yeah.
Rudy Johnson and TJ Hushmanzada. So that's a
Well,
really, really good draft class.
yeah. A lot of good Bengals in there.
Yeah, and you could do a whole podcast on how bad the 90s Bengals were, but they finally got a draft class right with this,
Yeah.
with some late pick receivers. But even Rudy Johnson had a hell of a, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Brees, his rookie season, he throws 27 passes. So we basically call that a red shirt. He
Yeah.
didn't do anything. Doug Flutie's the starter. Doug Flutie's in between Buffalo, where he was the starter, and lost his job to Rob Johnson, which I don't know if he should have. And then, he's on he's at the very back end of his career at that point. He had been in almost 20 years as a pro, played in the USFL. Kind of a transition year for the Chargers in 01. 2002, Drew Brees takes over. He's 8-8. Not bad. Second year player.
I want to say they started like 6-1 that year too. I think they were pretty damn good, and I think they kind of collapsed late in the year.
But yeah, I think you're right. And they go 8-8, 17 touchdowns, 16 picks, 3,200 yards. Young team though, so young teams collapse a lot of the times, like, especially November, December. They don't stay as healthy as long. And the AFC was kind of getting tougher at that point. Like, you had a lot of 5 and 6 or teams going for the 5 and 6 seeds.
Yeah,
2003 was the year that it kind of fell apart on them. So he goes 2-9 as a starter, and the Chargers earn that number one pick. And the 2004 draft happens, and that could be a podcast really on all on its own,
yeah,
where Eli Manning, he refuses to sign with the Chargers. So the Chargers GM, AJ Smith, and Giants GM, Ernie Accorsi, have to make a trade. And remember, Ernie Accorsi was the GM of the Baltimore Colts during the
yeah,
Elway draft.
yeah.
21 years before or something like that.
21, yeah,
That was the 83
83.
years. That was the 83 draft. So you have this kind of hostile situation where Manning and really Archie Manning, Eli's dad, he ain't playing in San Diego. He made it clear. So they have to work this like NBA style trade where in the NBA, when you watch the draft, when they make a trade during the draft, they draft the team that is trading away the asset.
Yeah, they still make the
Actually,
pick.
they make the pick for the player, right?
Hmm.
And then trade the player away. So Kobe Bryant, for example, got drafted by the Charlotte Hornets, but he was later traded to the Los Angeles Lakers, and the rest is history. This actually happened. That's not typically the case for the NFL. In the NFL, you trade the pick, and then the team that is really acquiring the player makes the selection. Didn't happen in the 04 draft. The Chargers select Eli with the first pick, and the Giants select Philip Rivers from NC State, number 4 overall. The Chargers send Eli to the Giants, but in exchange, they get Rivers, a 2004 third round pick, which was Nate Kading, the kicker, who ends up costing them a playoff game.
Yeah, twice.
Well, and he did it in his rookie year. A 2005 first round pick, which became Sean Merriman, who was
Oh my
lights out
God.
until he started testing positive for steroids. Uh,
until we all knew what would happen.
yeah, it's like that guy was like when you watch him celebrate, you're like, yeah, that guy's definitely doing some
He's
performance
juicing.
enhancing. He's juicing, and this was like the 2000s, man. So like we knew
Everybody
who
was on the juice. So we were all on the juice.
Yeah, I was juicing.
That was
I was kidding. But a 2005 fifth round pick that was traded away, so not as big of a deal. The Giants, the fun fact about this trade, though, or that kind of the scenario is, Corsi claims that if the Giants had stayed at 4, or I guess Eli, let's say if he goes to the Chargers, they actually don't take Philip Rivers, they take Big Ben. So that's a whole nother what if. Like if Eli just agrees to play for the Chargers, is Philip Rivers a Steeler? Is Big Ben a Giant? There's a whole
Yeah.
nother kind of scenario that unfolds there. But 2004, the season comes, and Drew Brees kind of throws a wrench in this whole plan for the Chargers. The Chargers take Philip Rivers, right? So they have a highly invested first round, 4th overall pick in the draft. He's the future. And back then there was no rookie wage scale. So these guys that were picked like top 5, they were expensive. Like they were the
Hmm.
highest paid quarterbacks in the league.
Yeah, most expensive players on the team. Yeah.
Once Rivers is selected, the clock's ticking on Drew Brees' time. There's nothing I think he could have really done.
Yeah. Did his best though.
He did. I think he made it hard for the Chargers. In 2004, he wins the comeback player of the year. Goes 11-4 as a starter, 27 touchdowns and 7 picks. And back then, that's an MVP caliber
Oh
season.
yeah.
He doesn't win MVP that year because Manning
Ran away with the yeah.
What did he throw, like 48, 49 touchdowns
The
that season?
49 touchdowns that year, yeah.
Yeah, he had like video game numbers, but I want to say that was like a similar stat line to what Manning did in '03, right?
Yes, because we talked about that last week.
Yeah.
It's very similar.
So similar numbers, really solid season. They lose a heartbreaking wild card game at home to the Jets. And Nate Kading, who was a part of that trade I just mentioned, he was picked in the third round, which is really high for a kicker, by the way. He misses a really a chip shot field goal in that game, and the Jets end up winning on the road in San Diego. So Drew Brees hasn't had a playoff win yet. He's on the final year of his deal going into '05, and regression hits. 9-7, 24 touchdowns, 15 picks, no playoffs. The thing that really hurts Brees here and kind of throws a wrench into everything is he suffers a dislocated shoulder, a really severe one, by the way,
Hmm.
on his final play of the season. So it was week 17 against the Broncos. Final play of his Chargers career. John Lynch sacks him in his own end zone or hits him in his own end zone. Drew Brees dislocates his throwing shoulder. And remember, he's a free agent at that point. The Chargers are definitely not going to invest him
Yeah.
at this point. Like
That made their decision even clearer.
I can't blame the Chargers for moving on because you have the fourth overall pick and they felt pretty good about where Rivers was. And I think the results in '06 kind of show that they were right. They went 14-2. Brees now has a lot of issues because he's going into the open market possibly as damaged goods. So he has to go to the most famous surgeon in sports and the guy you never ever want to hear your favorite athlete or your team's favorite player associated with. And not he's sounds like a great surgeon. I'm not saying he's not, but if your guy's seeing Dr. James Andrews, that's not good.
Yeah, no, it's hurting.
So James Andrews, and funny thing too, I listened to a podcast preparing for this. He's based in Birmingham, by the way. So you know who's really close with Dr. Jimmy, I think is what he called him.
Jimmy, like,
Dr. James Andrews is what
oh,
he calls him Jimmy.
oh, well, if he's in Birmingham, would he be close to Saban?
Yep. Drew Brees goes to James Andrews for his rehab or surgery and rehab to fix the shoulder. And
Okay.
James Andrews says he's going to recover. And Nick Saban hears that, or I think he just respected. I think secretly he just wanted the best quarterback available, which
Right.
Drew Brees was. But medical decisions are tough because you're investing a lot of money. So
Yeah.
the owner of the Dolphins, Wayne Huizenga, you have to convince him that hey, this is a risk worth taking, and Drew Brees is going to command some money. He becomes a free agent. He has 5 seasons with the Chargers. And the funny thing about it, though, like, I love his college profile. At that point in his career, if we were back in time and you and I were discussing free agency right now, or we were discussing the '06 free agency class,
Yeah.
I'm not that impressed by him. Like,
No.
he looks like Derek Carr.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah, very similar actually. Especially when you consider who he was kind of pitted up against, if you want to say it like that. We talked about his entire resume, and the guy that we're talking about him going up against was remember
Get your
this
roll
guy?
on. Get your
Dante
roll on.
Culpepper. Dante
He was
Culpepper was Justin Fields at a time. No.
he
He
had more
was
playoff success.
a
I
lot more
mean,
playoff success, and but just as inaccurate or sometimes accurate. He floated through. He had some incredible accuracy at times, but he had some boneheaded turnovers, and he was so athletic for being as big as he was. He had a breakout season in 2000. He threw 33 touchdowns, 16 interceptions, almost 4,000 yards, and then he was on the Madden cover the following year. Just 2 years before free agency, he had an incredible season. Probably, if we talked about this is the same year that Brees had 27-7, and we said that obviously that would have been MVP if not for Manning. Well,
yeah,
there's another guy that would have probably won MVP if not for Manning too that year,
yeah.
and that was Dante Culpepper because he threw nearly 40 touchdowns. And
Such a weird team though, because like that season statistically was so
they're like one of the
impressive.
worst playoffs teams of all time.
They went 8-8, and I know they beat a team with Green Bay that just had such an awful defense, and
Yeah.
Moss and Culpepper feasted on that in the wild card, but they got blown out at Philly. Like I look back at that Vikings team, and they weren't really that good.
Yeah. By DVOA, they were not good at all. And so, but yeah, that he had won 2 playoff games in his career. Dante did, as you mentioned, that 2004 Packers game, and then they won a divisional round game in 2000 against the Saints before they got throttled by the Giants in the NFC Championship. But Dante, his time was kind of, done in Minnesota after the '05 season, which infamously had the Love Boat on, wasn't that Lake Minnetonka? I
Yeah,
believe that
yeah,
happened on, yeah.
and we'll get into that because like
Yeah.
it's not just Culpepper that was involved in that.
Yes,
Like
it
it was the
wasn't just
entire
him.
team. But I mean, you talk about like kind of a like in all seriousness, like a back-breaking type moment because like
Yeah.
Ziggy Wolf at one point was like crying. The owner of the Vikings, he was like crying in front of the team and angry at why they would do such a thing. And I think really the Vikings from then on were like in a complete culture change. They wanted to get rid of like all of these guys that
Yeah.
from that Mike Tice era. So anyway, like we'll get into that in a second, but like Culpepper in general had a pretty impressive statistical resume. But
Yeah.
the interesting thing Saban actually brought up in the I think it was like Patrick Peterson and Brian McFadden's podcast, like some of his former players. I think Brian
Did they have
McFadden
him
did.
on?
They had him on,
Oh, I
and he
didn't
was
know that.
talking about the Brees scenario. But they had him on. James Andrews was actually more concerned about Culpepper's knee injury than he was
Oh, yeah.
Brees' shoulder injury, which I think that's kind of hindsight because,
Yeah.
of course,
Right.
Saban's going to say that.
Now we're gonna say that now.
Yeah. So, I mean, take it for what it's worth. But Culpepper wasn't exactly a clean bill of health either. And the '05 season really wasn't good. So it wasn't like he was just this, he was available for a reason,
Mm.
right? If he were this bona fide franchise quarterback, the Vikings wouldn't have been trading him.
And
So,
if you didn't want to pick from either of those two, of course, you always had the NFL draft.
yep.
And that was a unique draft group, to say the least.
Yeah. So Vince Young from Texas, national championship against
Heisman.
USC. Everybody
Did
loved.
he win the
Oh, he
Heisman?
didn't win the
No,
Heisman.
no, he didn't. That's
No,
right.
that was Reggie Bush.
Yeah, Reggie Bush. Yeah.
But Vince Young has that crazy Rose Bowl game. I want to say was that Keith Jackson's last game.
Yep. He's going for the corner. He's
Yeah.
got it. Vince
Yeah.
Young
What a
scores.
great, what a great era with him and like when Pat Summerall were doing games. Like
Oh,
just the stoic
never have
nature.
it again.
They never say anything. They just let the game breathe.
Yeah.
But
And now some guys try to do it and it just isn't, you know.
yeah, yeah, that's for sure. But like Vince Young he's kind of the prize of the quarterbacks. Matt Leinart, he was kind of the safe option, but kind of we laugh at that now because he busted.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, everyone's, oh, he runs the pro style offense. And yeah, I mean,
lefties, man, they don't work out.
lefties. Yeah.
Like Steve Young and then maybe Tua, we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Jay Cutler, who I remember like going back in time, and like I don't think this is something you can be like overly braggadocious about, but like I love Jay Cutler at Vanderbilt. Like he had the far quality aspects to his game. I think
Hmm.
one of the biggest what ifs is what if he just like if Shanahan stays in Denver?
Yeah. What if they had a
What
goddamn defense?
Yeah, if
Because,
Shanahan stays
like,
in yeah, but if Shanahan stays in Denver and you just let him develop in that system,
yeah,
I I think he I think he would be really good. I think he would have had a great career. He had a lot of talent,
he
but
did.
he went to a broken Chicago offense that had a great defense, but
Yeah.
Jay was putting makeup on a pig
With
in a lot of
Jay,
ways.
I always felt, and we might even talk about Jay at another point in time, but Jay was always a quarterback that I felt he played better when he didn't have as good of players around him. When they put all the good players around him, it didn't work out. It was weird. Like he always, like he It seemed like he was a better quarterback when he had Johnny Knox and Devin Hester catching passes rather than Brandon Martian and Alshon Jeffrey. I never understood it.
I still think we've talked about this before, but one of the greatest throws I've ever seen was that touchdown pass he had against the Chargers.
Oh, good to
Uh,
Johnny Knox. Oh,
was that 2011?
20. That was the game he broke his thumb.
I don't know how the curvature of this ball worked, but like it just the way it floated, and I was amazed. I was like, I've never seen something like that.
I thought he threw the ball 10 rows up into the stands and
It
it
looked like
just
a
landed into Johnny Knox's hands.
it
And
looked like a
so,
Steph Curry jump shot.
yeah, the
Like
way it popped up
yeah,
and then when he
it
broke
was
his, with the word came out that he broke his thumb later that night was like
yeah.
depression.
No one had more talent, at least arm talent, than Jay Cutler, and
Oh,
he should have been the number one pick in this draft. And people will laugh at me for saying that. I still think it's true.
yeah.
Kellen Clemens from Oregon, he was a second round pick, not really that relevant. And then
Nope.
Travaris Jackson, God rest his soul, late second round pick in Minnesota. So, and he's from Alabama State. But what I think this, and we should have seen this a little bit more with this quarterback class, shouldn't have been, it should have been more of a red flag that the Texans didn't take any of them and they
Yeah.
didn't have, like, they had David Carr at that point. Okay.
Hmm.
And then the Saints end up aggressively going after a quarterback with a broken shoulder, essentially.
Yeah.
Um, because if there were a really like a bona fide number one draft choice at quarterback, the Saints were picking number two. They're probably gonna see what happens in the draft, but I think it's pretty telling they didn't do that.
And
So,
this was just the year. I mean, this was right after Big Ben, who was a second year player, led the Steelers to a Super Bowl. So you would think in the year
yep,
before that they were 15-1. Now, granted, it wasn't Big Ben that he became like in the mid 2010s and early 2010s and that sort of guy.
yeah,
But it was still like you would, just the way the league works, it just like it does now. Like when, everybody's trying to find the next Patrick Mahomes, it's surprising that nobody saw Jay Cutler and was like, oh, he may not be as big as Big Ben, but like maybe he could be our Big Ben or something like that. But
and what if
nobody
Jay?
thought like that, Ben. You know,
Yeah, and what if Jay Cutler like gets Sean Payton? Like that's
yeah,
another what if from
that's
this
yeah,
episode. Like, because if I still think like if you gave him time under the Shanahan system and you gave him a better defense in the late 2000s, Jay Cutler has more wins than he does in Denver, but it
yeah,
just didn't work out that way.
for sure.
But the teams that needed quarterbacks in 2006,
Yeah, so the first one that we can think of, and they ended up taking one of those quarterbacks was the Arizona Cardinals. They were, I think it was their first year in the new stadium, '06. So kind of a
yes,
new era for them. Denny Green had not been working well. I think they only had like one notable. Well, they had Larry Fitz and that Anquan Bolden, and then they had Neil Rackers as their kicker. And
yeah,
that was the gist of their team. They did sign Kurt Warner the year before, but we had talked last week, and again, it's still something I want to talk about further. Warner, he had a weird career. The first 3 years of his career he was absolutely lethal. I mean, like
yeah,
his numbers were, I mean, granted, era
yeah,
adjusted, were unbelievable. And then the bottom fell out.
MVP
That's
his first season as a starter and won the Super Bowl.
yes, the first and third seasons.
So yeah,
Yeah, so it went bad. They ended up drafting Leinart, and Leinart was serviceable until he wasn't. Warner ended up coming back in towards the end of '06, and then I think they went back to Leinart at the start of '07, and then like midway through '07 they went back to Warner, and Warner did play better. Obviously, he got the Cardinals to the Super Bowl in '08, but
yeah,
like I
it
think
worked.
he got really hot at one.
It worked out for them. I mean, they went 9-7 in '08, but I mean, looking at just the 2005 Cardinals, he wasn't great. 11 touchdowns, 9 picks, 2-8 as a starter. They definitely could have looked at Drew Brees, but they instead went to the draft and went for Matt Leinart. So the next team, the Minnesota Vikings, this one is more of a cultural. They're going to trade Culpepper. The 2005 Vikings were really, really hyped up, which in hindsight didn't make a lot of sense. They traded like
Yeah.
this generationally good player in Randy Moss after the 04. He was kind of a malcontent himself. So they
Who did
trade
they
him.
draft in replace of him again?
Troy Williamson. So, and I love telling Viking fans this. It's like you drafted Troy Williamson and Erasmus James and let Green Bay draft Aaron Rodgers. 2005 is scandal ridden for this team. They have this, it's kind of known as the Love Boat scandal on Lake Minnetonka. Or is it Minnetonka or Winnetonka? One of those.
Minnetonka. I swam in it
Minnetonka.
one time.
Yeah. You got experience. I don't know, dude. You might want to go to the doctor after this story.
I was only 11 too when I swam in it.
So,
I could sue the Vikings for
yeah.
abuse of a
Yeah.
child.
I was about to say, like, you might need to like go to the doctor and check yourself for some things. But so some members of the Vikings, they rent a boat called Miss Chievous. So MISS Chievous, right? So mischievous, right? So already red flag. Accompanying, so it's a team party that they rent the boat for, and not everybody on the team shows up. So, and it's not officially a team event. It's not officially the Vikings, but a lot of the players were on this boat. Accompanying these players are 55 women. This is according to the stories. 55. That's a lot.
Young friends that they have.
They are there to entertain the clientele. So the kind of the ringleader of this scandal is cornerback Fred Smoot, Mississippi State legend. And so if there's a Barstool Sports documentary that focused in on the Love Boat scandal, but apparently he handles, quote, the weapon of mass destruction. Like, and he said afterwards, he said that the new owner of that boat, I don't know if it's been renamed since, but he said that the new owner should never use a black light.
Oh, God. That is horrible. Oh,
So 1 year, and this is 1 year after the whole Ontario Smith Wizinator incident. This team is just like in shambles in terms of like
mm,
culture. Like, and this was like the mid 2000s where everybody's like tracking. This is post NBA brawl. Remember the Pacers
yeah,
Pistons
the
brawl?
art test time. Yeah.
So everybody's like looking out for their image and they don't want like players getting caught up with the law. And so they're trying to kind of, and Culpepper was involved. He was there. They dispute whether he was acting with the rest of them. I don't know what happened, but I think the Vikings were looking to clean house with all their leadership, which head coach Mike Tice, quarterback Dante Culpepper, they're out. And of course they didn't win a ton of games in 05. So they fired Tice, and I mentioned Moss got traded the year prior. So they're like completely moving the script on that team from the early
Yeah.
2000s. So Dante Culpepper's he's on the market, but the Vikings under Brad Childress, who's their new head coach, are looking for a quarterback. And but instead they go for Brad Johnson. So they're not going for Drew Brees. So the next
And they were
team,
too far back from drafting any of the because they still did go like 9-7 in 05. So they were too far back for any of the
were they
rookies.
were they 9-7? I didn't actually write
Yeah.
their record down.
Yeah, no,
Were
they
they
were
that
nine and
good?
seven. Yeah. They
Oh
well, they
wow.
granted they finished 9-7 because they were 8-7 and the Bears rested their starters week 17 and they destroyed the Bears, but they destroyed the Bears backups.
I would have never thought that the 05 Vikings were actually better than the 04 Vikings.
Yeah, they um I guess. I mean, like they were not, I don't think it was like they might have needed help to get into the playoffs that final weekend, but I don't exactly remember, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, but anyways, the Detroit Lions are next, another NFC North team. Um, uh, 2005 was the midst of the Matt Millen era. It started off okay. I think they were about 4-3 about midway through the season, and then the train came off the tracks. It was the end of the Joey Harrington experience. They did dabble a little bit with Jeff Garcia, who visited quite a few teams after his stint with San Francisco.
Just a
And
journeyman
that,
kind of guy.
yeah, he was a total journeyman. Actually, he was a journeyman when he got to San Francisco because he was in the Canadian League before that. And so he did okay, but obviously he was not going to be the quarterback of the future. And they roll with John Kitna, a former NAIA quarterback, for some reason. I guess he left Cincinnati after '05, huh? Because he would have
Yeah.
played in that playoff game.
I think he
Um,
might have, was he in Detroit? No, no, he was the backup under Carson Palmer because I think he played in that
yes.
playoff game.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he
So,
he played after Chemo Von Alfla or whatever
yeah.
his name was,
Yeah.
tore
The
his knee.
MVP of the 2005 Steelers. So, because I'm still convinced the Bengals win that game if Palmer stays healthy.
Carson Palmer was actually a really good quarterback. Yeah, so they had their chance at, Cutler or Brees. They didn't take either of them.
This is the
But
team. This is the
it,
team. I'm just like, what the hell are you thinking? Like, what are you
yeah,
going into '06? Why are
this was
you
a
just
team
not?
that just made bad decisions after bad decisions. This was
Yeah,
they took three straight wide receivers in the draft,
yeah. But
um, in the
you
first
don't.
round.
They seriously went into the '06 season thinking, hey, we're gonna take we're gonna take John Kitna and completely pass over Drew Brees.
Cross our fingers.
And I get it. Like I'll give the Dolphins the excuse of the shoulder injury for Brees.
Yeah,
You don't even bring him in for a visit because apparently,
no,
according to Breeze, only really two teams were interested: the Dolphins and the Saints. So
it's
this is one of
wild.
those teams. What the hell are you thinking, Detroit? Like you just roll into '06,
Yeah,
John Kitt, and there's a quarterback on the market that is obviously an upgrade, and you go to John Kitna. That I saw that, and I'm thinking that was a really stupid decision,
oh
and
yeah.
then it was Matt Millen.
The Raiders were next. The Raiders were in the midst of after their 2002 Super Bowl run. They were pretty awful. Norv Turner got them to 4-12 in 2005.
Yeah,
They signed post Katrina Aaron Brooks. This was not Aaron Brooks early 2000s. This was, like I said, this was after a really bad year in '05, which
yeah.
was beyond the Saints' control, but still a puzzling move. And then they had Art Shell as head coach in 2006. They went back to Art Shell.
And
So
that was horrible. Like that was one of the worst teams of the last 20 years. Was that
oh
'06
yes,
Raiders team.
oh God,
And
led them to drafting Jamarcus Russell.
yeah, it did a lot of good for them. So
Yeah,
remember, tanking always works.
yeah,
So the I'll say the Raiders are the other team along with the Lions, and we'll get to the Browns in a second, but they're a what the fuck are you doing team.
yeah,
Like you had him, and you decide to go after Aaron Brooks, and you don't really put a lot of consideration into Drew Brees, at least on the record. I didn't get that. But the Raiders at that point were making a lot of crazy moves, including hiring Art Shell as head coach in '06. That was really stupid. Cleveland was the team, the third team I mentioned. I don't know what the hell they're thinking. 6
yeah.
and 10 in '05. You're not good. And then you actually figure out how to make it worse because I think they was it Garcia in '05. No, Garcia was with Detroit at that point.
'04. It was Garcia
I
in
don't even
Cleveland.
remember I don't have the quarterback written down for '05, but they decide we're gonna roll
Oh,
out with
it was Trent Dilfer, I want to say. Yeah, because
so
they actually beat the Bears, I remember. And that
so
was the Mike Brown we suck game, and the Bears and then ended up they wound up winning 8 in a row after that.
Yeah. So, but they go 3-13 in '06 with Charlie Fry and Derek Anderson. So it really worked out well for them. This is the biggest kind of like, what are you doing moment, because
Yeah.
you don't have anything at QB. I mean, like, you can't even like. There's some teams that, like we said, they drafted guys that didn't work out. The Texans, who we'll go over in a second, they still had a first round guy. Like, no, this team, I don't know how you can excuse that they weren't really interested in Brees. I'll never understand the Browns not really pursuing him harder, because I think Brees could have been had. I don't
Yeah.
think it was. I don't think the Saints were like in such a great position to just go get a free agent. Like it kind of. I feel like Brees kind of fell in the Saints' laps. Uh, but anyway, I don't think I can't excuse the Browns at all for missing out on this. The only team that was smart enough to actually make the decision to bring him in was probably the team with the worst situation
Hmm.
in the league. And people don't think that now. They'll like laugh at Detroit and Cleveland because those are the laughing stocks, right, of the 2000s. But the Saints, like, you have to think, they were a poorly run team. So in '99, Ditka trades the entire draft for Ricky
Hmm.
Williams, a running back. Like, the most hilarious ESPN magazine cover ever, where he's on the cover and he's getting married. Was it Ricky was in the dress, right?
Ricky was in the dress.
This was back in the day. I added a footnote because I always thought this was funny. That Al Michaels, this was back in the day when he would pronounce New Orleans, New Orleans. It used to drive me crazy because no one else says it like that. You either hear New Orleans or New Orleans, and he says New Orleans, and it like, and I used to ask people, and it's like no one else noticed this. In 2000, first year with Jim Haslett, they go 10-6. They win the NFC West, but winning your division doesn't always mean that you're actually like super productive. But they get a win, they get a playoff win. Their first win, I think that was their first playoff win in history.
Ever. Yep.
Yeah. In the voodoo game is what that's known as, because the Rams kept screwing up, and I think it was because they brought like a snake out on the field. Like,
Yeah, at halftime.
yeah, the Rams can blame it on that, I guess. 2001, 7-9, but remember, that's pretty good for the Saints at this point. Like, they were not going out. If you left '99 saying like in 2 years you'll be 7-9, you'd be like, okay, that's not bad. That's not the worst. 2002, 2003 is kind of like, it's the year where Deuce McAllister is like the face of the team, and you have Aaron Brooks. It's not a great setup. Like,
No.
you're not looking at that team thinking Super Bowl anytime soon. Yeah, they kind of overachieved, and that's probably why coaches like Mike McCarthy ended up getting jobs later. Um, 2005, though, the wheels come off, and I think understandably so.
Yeah.
They were displaced and disorganized because of Hurricane Katrina. Hits right at the tail end of the preseason. The Saints are forced to play home games in three different cities. New York, they actually had a home game against the Giants in New York.
Yeah.
Uh, and then
It was like
they
on
had
a
to play.
Friday night too, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So they had that. They had San Antonio, and they had Baton Rouge. So that's a really hard thing to like, because if you think about the players that are in that situation, they're not with their families the entire
Yeah.
time, because their families are seeing things through when they can get back to the city, like with
Yeah.
wherever their homes are. So you have a lot of crap you're dealing with. So they
Right.
go 4-12. They're not in a great position to win a lot of games. But the team is also in really bad shape. It hasn't been managed super well. It has been coached. I don't think Jim Haslett was ever a bad coach, but I don't think he was a great coach. This team is a mess. And a lot of things, the biggest what if I have is, number one, the point is Drew Brees saved this franchise. Because if Brees doesn't come to New Orleans, here's my what ifs, and I'll let you kind of give your what ifs. If Drew Brees doesn't go to New Orleans, if he, let's say he, you know, it didn't flunk his physical in Miami and he signs there, I think the Saints move. to Los Angeles.
Hmm.
I think that the let me see here. I think the Saints moved to Los Angeles, and they don't have the early success under Sean Payton that they had in New Orleans. The Rams and the Chargers probably don't have. They probably have to find another option instead of going to Los Angeles. You probably have the Chargers and the Rams trying to go to Vegas, or maybe one of these cities works it out. The Rams and the Saints have to switch divisions. They have to draft Vince Young
That,
or Matt Leinart.
yeah.
They do they trade for Aaron Rodgers? Like, do they reach out to the Packers? The Raiders tried doing that at the start of the '07 season.
Hmm.
They tried trading Randy Moss to Green Bay for Aaron Rodgers. Packers wisely said no. Do you try that
Damn
in
it.
'06? Do they trade for Culpepper? Um, and does Sean Payton have the level of success and the level of respect he does now? I doubt that. And lastly, does Parcells end up with a front office job in New Orleans instead of Miami because he has to rebuild this
He has to go.
catastrophe?
Well, and he has to go save his buddy Sean Payton
Yeah,
because Sean Payton worked with Bill Parcells in Dallas.
yeah,
Um, Bill Parcells last year in Dallas was '07, right?
yeah. Or no,
Oh,
'06.
'06.
Wade
Okay.
Wade Phillips took over in '07.
Okay. I can never remember that for whatever reason. I always get those 2 years confused.
Yeah, it's because '07 they lost at home to the Giants. That was Wade
My
Phillips.
my what ifs were always no, so those are some really good ones to contemplate. And you could sit down and go through every single one of those scenarios and say, well, this could have happened. I've always wondered what would the ramifications on the NFC be after that. Um, Obviously that '06 Saints team, as we'll talk about here in a few minutes, they stunned the country. They stunned the league. They had those two early wins. And I don't even remember who they played the first two games this season, but then everybody remembers the week 3 game. When and I just got chills even thinking about it. The Monday night game against Atlanta in the Superdome when Steve Gleason blocked the punt, and the Saints scored. I'll never forget watching that moment and Mike Tirico having the wherewithal to shut up and let the moment speak. That
Yeah,
was I'll never I I only can imagine what it was like being in that dome that night. And of course, they went on, they had a storybook season and they ran into the Bears in the NFC Championship. But the Bears won an NFC that year that was really weak. Like the Saints storybook team and all. And the Saints were getting picked to beat the Bears in the NFC Championship. But the Saints were 10-6 and they were the 2 seed. There's sometimes 10-6 teams don't make the playoffs, let
yeah. I
alone be
think
the 2 seed.
I think this was the year there were like 7 teams finishing 8-8.
Yes,
Like,
there was.
because
Yes,
I
that was the
remember Green
year.
Bay was trying to get in the playoffs the last day of the season, but they needed like
I
five
think they needed
teams
the
to lose.
Giants to lose or something like that.
Yeah, that I was really upset that Saturday night they were playing Washington. The Giants were, and I wanted the Redskins to beat the Giants, and
Yeah.
that
So
didn't
were they
happen.
out then?
No, they had a mathematical chance, but it was like very small. They had
Yeah.
to have like maybe 4 or 5 teams win in the 1 o'clock window, and like one of those didn't happen. So that Sunday night game against Chicago,
Was
it
meaningless.
it didn't mean anything. But then
Yeah.
that was the whole like Brett Favre is going to
Will
retire.
he or what? That was the first will he,
Yeah,
won't
he
he?
was he was crying, and then he didn't retire.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that kind of actually that brings me to my next thing because obviously the Saints did eventually break through in the end. And who do they have to go through to get to the Super Bowl? Was Brett Favre and the Minnesota Vikings.
yeah,
Does now, I mean, it's hard, when you make um a hypothetical about a situation and then try to make something that happened 3 years down the line. Obviously that's when you start, maybe you can consider that grasping at straws. But obviously the Saints aren't that team in 2009. Who is that team? I mean, we don't know if Favre even goes to the Vikings. Favre, Favre might even go to New Orleans. Like he might, I don't know. He might want to play with Sean Payton or something. He's playing in a
Yeah.
dome. His family they lived in the Mississippi River Delta area there.
I well,
Um,
but like I said, I mean, do we even know that Saints? Do they even stay in New
do
Orleans?
they even stay?
So
But do the Vikings, my point was, do the Vikings just waltz to the Super Bowl that year? And I thought the Vikings were the best team in football in 2009. I thought the winner of that NFC championship would win the Super Bowl.
yeah,
So, or does Peyton get his second? So,
yeah.
um, and then of course, it does lead. Obviously, you can't really expunge anything that happened, say the last few years of like when Brees and Peyton had their last hurrah here just a
Yeah.
few years ago. That's too far away. But you do wonder like the late 2000s, early 2010s when the Saints still had some really strong rosters. Suddenly now those aren't that's one less team competing in the NFC. And at a time when the NFC wasn't rolling out as many great teams at that time.
My last question for the Saints before we go to the Dolphins and then we finish up. Does Drew Brees break all these records? Does he become, the all-time leading passer for a moment in time before Brady broke it? He doesn't
Well,
get Sean Payton. He
yeah.
doesn't get to play in a dome 9+ games a year. Because remember, in the NFC South, if you're the Saints, you play 8 at home or sometimes 9, once the schedule turned to 17 games. Plus, you play in Atlanta. So you're playing inside for more than half the season every single year. The Miami skill players, and we'll transition to Miami in a second, were not, I don't think, as great as the ones he eventually got to play
No.
with in New Orleans because they were more aging veteran players like Marty Booker, Ricky Williams, Chris Chambers.
Marty Booker, the Bears traded him for Adewale Ogunleye. Like that was a great trade.
Yeah, so
The Bears won
he,
that one.
yeah, so I don't know if I don't know if, and like I made the point earlier, Drew Brees doesn't have this. His Chargers resume wasn't like even a Pro Bowl resume.
Yeah.
Does he
Who knows?
become this
He
all
might
time
have
great
just
quarterback?
sputtered out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's a great question. And on the flip side, you know, if you're the Dolphins, you see what he did in New Orleans. My questions are, you know, do they become overnight contenders in the AFC? Do they challenge the Patriots? Do they challenge the Steelers, the Chargers, the Colts for that AFC throne, which was really hard to contend for at the time? These teams were stacked at
Yeah.
that point in time.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, those were some great. How come the NFC has never had something like that?
well, it did in the 90s.
In the 90s, yeah, but like
Yeah.
since we started watching,
Yeah. I don't know.
it's always been the AFC.
Yeah. It's because the quarterbacks. And I mean, it's
Yeah,
like that
they've
now.
just had a concentration. Yeah, it's still like that. I mean,
Yeah.
the
My
likes
other,
of Josh Allen will never go to a Super Bowl
yeah.
because of
It,
who he has to contend with.
yeah, that's true. I think who knows? Maybe Josh Allen's like Elway and he'll get there when he's like washed up and they have it like they just ride the run game.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, they'll have like Terrell Davis Jr. out there. But
Yeah.
my other what if, Nick Saban, if he stays in Miami, does he continue to build Miami into this winning program? Because this is a spot from '07 after Saban left. This was a spot where they went through Cam Cameron one season, Tony Sperano, that was through 2011. So that was '08, '09, 10,
Or
11, 40 seasons.
and
Joe
then Philbin.
Philbin for a few seasons. They had Adam Gaze, which was awesome for them. Uh, Adam Gaze, funny enough, had probably more success than Joe Philbin did. He got to the playoffs once.
By wins, but his teams were always
Awful.
paper tigers. They
Yeah.
were like they would be like 8-8 or 7-9, but like they would have a point differential that would be fifth worst in the league or something like
Yeah,
that.
the 2016 Steelers, like the fact that they got to play an Adam Gase Dolphins playoff team, just
Yeah,
cracks me up.
it was unfair.
And then Brian Flores, who kind of just you know coached, he showed a lot of promise with some of his Dolphins teams, but overall, like his teams were not very good either. So,
Yeah.
does Bill Parcells? Does he? I mean, he probably never has to go to Miami to do a quick rebuild with Tony Sperano because Nick Saban stays there. That doesn't need to happen. Um, I even wrote Junior Seau can stay on and ring chase with the Dolphins and doesn't have to go to the Patriots
Hmm.
at the very end of his career because the Dolphins are probably AFC contenders with Drew Brees. Jason Taylor's relationship doesn't sour with the Dolphins front office and coaching staff, and he never has to go to the Redskins or eventually the Jets to.
I forgot he was in Washington.
Yeah, he was there for a
He
season.
he went back to Miami though, didn't he?
He did, and then I think he finished with the Jets. So he had kind of a weird ending to his career, but I think he
Yeah.
just stayed. He's probably just a lifetime Dolphin if Nick Saban, if he
Right?
stays there. Yep. Zach Thomas, he stays on. He does the same thing. He doesn't go to the Cowboys in 2008, which was probably a ring chasing move in hindsight because the '08 Cowboys preseason wise, they were really highly regarded.
Outed. Yeah.
They went 13-3 in '07. So Zach Thomas probably stays a career Dolphin. So you have these two Hall of Fame defensive players that never played for any other team. So like that
Yeah.
hurts as a Dolphin fan to think like, the fact that we couldn't get quarterback right made the ending of our two Hall of Fame defensive players kind of sour. Um, and
And a
then
lot of
Wes,
players love to go play out in my or play down in Miami
yeah,
too. Like they would have been such a hot
a hot
bed for
team,
free agents, you know.
kind of like they are now because Tua is good enough where you
Yes.
think you can win with him.
Right.
And uh, my other kind of to finish up some of these what ifs, Wes Welker uh, doesn't go to the Patriots. He stays on as a Dolphin because Brees and Saban recognize what they have.
He
Um,
doesn't
ca-
catch 140 balls from Tom Brady.
Catches 140 balls from Drew Brees probably. And
Yeah.
uh, Alabama doesn't hire Nick Saban, and you
Yeah.
know he won't leave a Super Bowl contending team. Um, he's even told, in multiple interviews, the reason, and I'll give you a quote from him to be exact. The year before, he's talking about 2006, Drew Brees was a free agent, and we were in the mix to get him. I think when that didn't work out, I was like, we worked our tail off. And because of this one position that we haven't been able to solve, I can't control my own destiny. So he basically, I think, once they don't get Brees, I think he's resigned. He's done with
Yeah.
Miami. He coaches the '06 season because he's got to kind of see that through. But he's thinking his next move already at that point. He ain't fixing the Dolphins without Drew Brees. So, but if he does get Drew Brees, I think he stays with Miami. I think he's basically made that clear. And I don't, and Wayne Huizenga has the money or had the money at the time
Hmm.
to match whatever Alabama brings, I think. Like, and he probably would have gotten an extension if he had shown some promise in '06.
Yeah.
He ends up going to Alabama. Um, and Alabama, if you look at their angle, is like their other candidates weren't really that strong. And obviously, you're comparing them to Nick Saban, arguably the greatest college football coach of all time. But you're looking at Steve Spurrier at South Carolina,
Yeah.
who is probably towards the tail end of his career. Um,
Yeah. He
he spent
lasted a
like
few more years.
he spent about 8 years, but like I don't think Spurrier was ever going to win another national championship in that
Never.
environment. Um, Shiano, that's he had a strong resume, but his reputation soured because he went to the NFL. That's an interesting one. I think Cutcliffe, David Cutcliffe, he had a strong reputation because of the Mannings, but I don't think he was ever meant to be a coach at a huge program like that. Um, and then Rich Rod, and we saw what a great job he did at Michigan.
Oh, God.
Um, so Alabama was a mess in '06. I don't think they become this powerhouse, and I think that's safe to say because Nick Saban. has proven how consistently excellent he is at the college level. He did it at LSU as well. Um,
It's it just thinking about him obviously staying in New or in Miami, it makes me wonder what it does to Bill Belichick because Belichick now if he has somebody as strong as Saban in his division, his best friend, really, I'm assuming. I think they're best. I hope they're
yeah,
best friends. Um, but somebody as strong as him, the weird funny angle of that is he is a Dolphins coach. Like right now, he's chasing a Dolphins coach. It doesn't look like he's going to get it right now. Don Shula, of course, for the all-time win record.
yeah,
Um, but if Saban was there, he would have a Dolphins coach as an impediment to getting past Don Shula in the end. So it's
yeah,
almost like it was Don Shula that he could have been the one that was like playing the puppeteer with putting Nick Saban in the way of Bill Belichick. Obviously, that's not how back then people thought it was going to happen. I think Belichick had obviously great success then, but nobody thought his success was going to be as strong for as long as it was.
yeah,
For him to get as close to Shula in the end.
yeah. That's for sure. And those Patriots teams, like you know, if you're playing in a division with Saban and Drew Brees, like I have it written down. I think the Patriots end up playing three road playoff games from '07 to 19. I don't think they get the one seed every single year, basically,
No,
for over a decade.
yeah,
That's an amazing feat. That's the only thing that tops that is Mahomes's record of road playoff games. He's only played in two.
yeah,
And before this year, he played in zero. But New England never had to go and leave Foxborough, which was such a tough place to play. I don't see that happening if you're having to play a great Dolphins team led by Nick Saban twice a season.
yeah.
So
It's every other year sort of a thing.
the whole NFL and AFC playoff picture completely changes year over year.
In
You
college
can,
football in general, and even just
yeah,
in college football, I don't know why I just thought of this, but all the assistants that came from Saban at Alabama,
yeah. Was
that was
Kirby
a true,
smart? Does
yeah.
he become
Where's
this
Kirby
great?
Smart? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the biggest ripple effect of the 21st
Oh,
century in college and pro football, in my opinion.
yes,
Just one
certainly.
decision by a team doctor in Miami. So to finish up, we're gonna go over what really happened. So we kind of gave you the hypothetical: what happens if Drew Brees signs with the Dolphins? Completely changes the picture. We think the Dolphins stay relevant. The Patriots don't become a dynasty. Alabama's never a dynasty. Um, the Patriots are a dynasty in the 2000s, but not the 2010s, right? Um, but what actually happened? Brees signs with the Saints, right? Saints win the Super Bowl in 2009. They went to three championship games: '06, '09, and 18. They had 8 playoff seasons, over 68,000 passing yards,
Oh my God. Oh,
571. That's shit. And he had like 80,000 for his career. 68,000 came just with the Saints. So
in
like
15 years,
yeah,
that's
he
4,500 a season.
he put up amazing stats consistently every single year. He broke the single season yards record in 2011. Stayed healthy pretty much the entire time. I think the 19 season was the only year he had health issues. See, he hurt his finger
Yeah.
in 2019. Bridgewater started some games. Um, so before Breeze arrived, New Orleans had one playoff win in franchise history. We talked about the 2000 wild card. He alone has 9 playoff wins just for the
a-
Saints,
And none since.
and they haven't won since. So Drew Brees owns every single playoff win at the quarterback position. Sean Payton can claim the same thing. He is undisputedly the best player in franchise history. for the New Orleans Saints.
All by chance.
The Dolphins in 2006. Saban, he ends up leaving right after that season. He tells local media, uh, he repeatedly tells them that he's not leaving. He's not leaving. And it would question his character on why he would leave. And it's just BS. And like, I think it's understandable why he left. I felt like he couldn't win and he wanted to leave. I think that's
Yeah.
completely fair. But a lot of local media, uh, they don't like how he handled it. Um, so Jim Mandich, famous Dolphin, famous Michigan Wolverine,
Michigan
actually.
tight end. Yeah.
He's quotes saying he's the biggest piece of turd to ever hit Miami. There's a lot of turds that have hit Miami, by the way. There's some not so great people that have gone through that city. Um, if Nick Saban, and this is a quote again, if Nick Saban walked through that door, I'd say, let's go. Biggest two-bit phony I've ever met in my life, period. Not a
What
fan.
a way with words.
And God rest his soul because he passed
Yeah.
away, I think, in like 2010.
Yeah.
Um, he was known as the Nick Tater to a lot of local reporters and national reporters. I don't think NFL people liked it, like the media people liked him very much because he was just so sour. He was definitely more of a fit for the college game in terms of how he handled himself. But he was very Belichick like in terms of he didn't like giving access to anybody. He just was more of a dick about it than Belichick. Belichick just didn't say anything. Nick was just mean about it. I don't think he liked handling professional athletes. I think he liked the control he got from the college game.
Yeah.
We talked about how Saban felt the Drew Brees situation really changed his attitude towards pro football because, in college football, you can take a risk on a player with a bad shoulder because
Yeah.
at least at
You
that
could,
time you could.
yeah. Medically red shirt.
Yeah, because, now with NIL, it's different because you are paying these guys. But, in '06, you know, in 2006, when Miami was looking to upgrade quarterback, they had to pay for it. And you have to tell the
Mhm.
NFL, you have to tell this owner, like, I'm going to guarantee this guy a certain amount of money, but I can't guarantee that his shoulder's healthy enough to last through the contract. That's a tough thing to sell to somebody that has made it their life to become unbelievably wealthy. That's just a
Yeah.
hard thing to sell. So I think in college, you can just take that risk. The worst thing you lost is a scholarship. Like it's not the same type of risk. So I think that's where he saw the disconnect, and I think he found that Alabama in college fit him better. Um, Alabama, like we mentioned, becomes a dynasty. They become the biggest NFL pipeline for talent over the last 15 years. A half dozen, I think, national championships. Dolphins end up being horrible in '07. They hire Parcells and Sperano to fix it in '08. That's a short term thing. They're pretty much irrelevant up until really this day.
Yeah.
They've made a little bit of noise with Mike McDaniel, but they still have not been to. They haven't even won a playoff game. I think they haven't been to.
They haven't won a playoff game since 2000. They have the longest drought without a playoff win
Yeah,
right
their
now in
their
the
last
NFL.
their last divisional game was 1999 where they lost to the Jacks, and Jimmy Johnson was the head coach. And
Or no,
Jimmy
2000.
2000. You're right. Yeah,
They lost
2000.
to the Raiders.
Yeah. So it was with Jay Fiedler and
Yeah. So
Dave Wannstedt.
that that tells you.
It's been 23 years. And and then like we said, the Patriots win 3 Super Bowls over those next 12 seasons. The Who knows what happens? The AFC just completely was dominated by Peyton Manning teams, Pittsburgh and New England, and really New England for the most part.
Yeah.
So this scenario completely flips the script from 2006 to the present day. And I'd argue it is the defining moment in college and pro football over the next 2 decades. Thanks for listening to the Old Souls Football Podcast. Don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe.